can you hear us?
I can hear you from a distance, it's a bit low.
It's a bit low.
And your mic is maybe not very sensitive.
Okay, just hold as we test.
Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, we can hear you clearly. See you.
Good. Happy to see you too.
We are sorry for the delay. We're just testing the sound. Sandra, maybe you can say something if they can hear you.
Thank you very much for joining us. We are currently admitting all participants that have registered with us. Apologies for the delay. My name is Sandra Oyombe from FIDA Kenya. Thanks, Claire. I can see you there. Thanks, Peter Wanyonyi, for joining us all the way from New York, Australia, if I'm not wrong, or New Zealand. Great. You can hear me? You can hear me?
I can hear very clearly.
Great.
But not the young brothers and sisters.
Moses, unasikia
Moses,
sasa?
sasa amplify. He needs to amplify his
Unasikia
way.
sasa?
And I'm scared. Can I ever go down the lane?
Okay. Karibu Halai. It's a pleasure having you on board.
Hello, DJ.
But you can see us.
Yeah, you can see one thing, yeah.
Thank you.
And hi, Claire.
Hi.
So you address question.
Okay, I think we are ready to start. Technical team.
Yes, we are ready.
People team.
We are boosting your sound.
Okay, just a minute as we try to boost my sound.
I think what you want to do is probably to push the microphone to the middle, in between the two of you. That way it can pick up equidistantly. So, yeah, something of the sort.
Okay.
If that's possible.
How do you push?
Okay, is that better now?
Yeah, so you want to sort of, yeah, exactly. Yeah, something like that.
Ah, okay.
Here we go.
Thank you, Peter, for the technical assistance. Yeah, so allow us to start. Welcome to this webinar now. My name is Moses Okinyi, and we are coming to you live from FIDA Kenya offices in Nairobi.
My name is Sandra Oyombe. I work with the Federation of Women Lawyers. Thank you very much for joining us. For all our audience, we want to thank you for taking time to be with us and participate in this webinar, which is themed the Kenyan Diaspora Policy, Safeguarding Human Rights Standards for the Protection of Women Migrant Workers. This webinar was conceptualized as a result of the work that the Federation of Women Lawyers, together with the Victims Advocates International, as well as Kenya Diaspora Association, have done around women migrant workers. The three organizations have supported women migrant workers who have come to them with various violations or forms of exploitations that they have experienced while in the diaspora, and specifically the Gulf Cooperation Council. With us, we have a panel of 4 people whom we shall introduce, and I shall give this opportunity to Moses to be able to introduce the first panelist with us.
Okay, welcome. The first panelist is Mr. Peter Wanyonyi. Peter Wanyonyi, since 2015, has lived and worked in New Zealand, where he's currently employed as a technical lead of the Generation IT platform. Previously, Peter worked in Saudi Arabia between 2004 and 2015, with academic breaks in between. He's worked in Kuwait and Qatar. Before that, he was a IT manager at Britam Kenya, based initially in Nairobi, but with stints in Uganda, Zambia, Tanzania, and Malawi. While living in Saudi Arabia, Peter helped set up and led the Kenyan Society in Saudi Arabia in 2012, focusing on helping Kenyans caught up in Saudi Arabia's difficult social and legal environment. Since leaving Saudi Arabia, Peter has kept in touch with the General Direction of Migrant Workers, especially on their rights in the country, as well as with sometimes disappointing lack of action from Kenyan and other African diplomatic officers in the Middle Eastern region. Karibu, Peter.
Our second panelist is Halai Jimase. Halai Jimase is an African tribal artist based in Saudi Arabia, and she paints portraits of African people with a lot of reference to African culture. She has been painting portraits professionally for the last 7 years. She is current, and she has had 9 solo exhibitions in Saudi Arabia, and has also participated in 24 group exhibitions in Riyadh and Doha, Saudi Arabia, Dubai, Kuwait, London, Barcelona, New York, and Italy. Through her artwork, she hopes to change opinions across the world and to change the perception of African people and African culture. She also hopes to instill the values of African people upon modern generations through her paintings. She has a Bachelor of Science degree in geology from the University of Nairobi, and her second degree in interior design. Prior to her making her career change, she had a corporate background in marketing management and gained a lot of experience from working for white-collar corporations for 10 years. Both Peter Wanyonyi and Halai Jimase are members of the Kenya Diaspora Association, and specifically the Welfare Association, and therefore they have gotten in touch with various migrant workers across the globe who have either reported various violations or exploitation. Our third panelist is Claire Brown. She is the Deputy Director of Victims Advocates International. She coordinates the network of victims groups for Victims Advocates International, as well as oversees research and advocacy. Claire is an international human rights lawyer with 10 years experience working on accountability for human rights violations and international crimes, with a particular focus on access to justice for victims of sexual violence. She has worked on cases from Kenya, Somalia, South Sudan, and Myanmar, as well as migrant workers living in Lebanon, and is currently based in Beirut. Karibu Claire, Karibu Halai, and Karibu Peter Wanyonyi to this session, and we hope to have fruitful deliberations on the topic that is at hand. So we shall begin this discussion with the question of migration. Now, migration specifically from the African countries to the Gulf and Middle East is on the increase. That is not without a doubt. And people regularly choose to migrate because of the harsh economic and employment realities in Africa. So we would like to understand from you specifically. We'll begin with Peter Wanyonyi on what are the drivers of migration in the African continent.
Yeah, thank you. I think it is clear that migration to the Gulf from East Africa today, in particular, and Africa in general, is mostly driven by economics. The story of migration from Africa to the Arab world is not new. It's been there for about 800 years. For the first about 700 years, it was generally forced in the form of slavery.
Thank you very much for that elaborate explanation.
Okay, thank you very much, Peter, for that. And I'd like to ask Claire, the COVID-19 pandemic came with a lot of challenges across the world. And my question to you would be, has the vulnerability of migrant workers become more apparent because of the COVID-19 pandemic?
Sorry, my internet just cut out. The vulnerability of migrant workers, did you say?
Yes.
As a result.
Has the vulnerability of migrant workers become more apparent with the COVID-19 pandemic?
Okay. Has the mobility become more apparent? Yeah. So I can.
The vulnerability.
I can answer.
Sorry.
The vulnerability. Okay.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. I mean, I can answer. My specific experience is working with migrant domestic workers, including specifically Kenyan migrant domestic workers in Lebanon. But my understanding is that it's a very similar situation everywhere, where when the COVID lockdown happened, and in Lebanon, it wasn't just the COVID lockdown, it was accompanied by a massive financial crash. The Beirut blast also happened at around the same time, and all of these kind of stress fractures that were happening in Lebanon really exposed the vulnerability of migrant domestic workers, because they are so tenuous in these countries. Their ability to legally stay here is completely dependent on them being sponsored by a particular employer. If the employer doesn't want to sponsor them anymore, then they can end a contract. That person becomes illegally stranded in the country. And there are also a lot of problems. I mean, technically, the employer is supposed to then fly them back home, but it's very easy in Lebanon, and I think the other countries as well, for the employer to get out of that by just phoning the police and accusing the domestic worker of doing something. Running away even is a punishable offence. They can say, baselessly accuse them of stealing money from them, and that means they're not responsible for even paying for their plane flight back home. So what happened in a situation where people have to completely change their living circumstances because of lockdown, people all of a sudden didn't have the money they did before. A lot of migrant domestic workers were just thrown out onto the streets. As the situation got tough, people were literally just leaving them outside the Kenyan embassy, and they were left in a situation where, first of all, they were homeless. Second of all, they didn't have money because they weren't getting paid, and their savings had lost all of this value because of the financial crash. And then thirdly, because of COVID, they were also forced to be in these situations where they were cramming into houses and all having to live together because they had no other options. And so the COVID rates within the domestic worker population was here as well. So there's just all of these compounding, they're facing just so many intersectional forms of vulnerability related to the fact that they have no legal status here, they don't have access to proper health care. As soon as anything goes wrong, there's absolutely no social net to help them. And there was a lot of different things that were happening, COVID being a big one last year, that really exposed all of these reasons that if the system stays as it is the second something goes wrong, domestic workers have absolutely no way to protect themselves.
Oh, thank you very much for that, and for highlighting some of the vulnerabilities that have been experienced during the COVID-19 pandemic. We have just been joined by a victim, exploitation and violations in Saudi Arabia. She has just joined us. Her name is Virginia, and we would want to rope her into this discussion and perhaps hear from the horse's mouth the kind of challenges, or what made her next of kin or dependent move to Saudi Arabia. Virginia, karibu. Unaelewa Kizungu? Yeah, so she is able to express herself in English, and we'll give her the opportunity to be able to say something. Ni kwa nini haswa mwenye unamtegemea alienda Saudi Arabia?
Okay, I'm Virginia Waigerero.
No.
I'm Virginia Waigerero. I'm the aunt to the lady who went to Saudi Arabia, Margaret Wairimo Modoni. She left Kenya in 2012, Feb 25th, because of some difficulties in life. she wanted to go to look for a greener pasture for her to bring up her child up. And so we decided for her to go to look for a greener pasture. And she has been working over there, but once she went there, she has been overcoming, undergoing difficulties in her life, experiencing no payments. She's working and no payments, yet there is no breakthrough in communication. Communication has been breaking down. She doesn't even have time to talk with her child. She only left a 5-year-old boy in nursery school, and right now he's in secondary school. He joined this year, and now the boy has been missing his mother. He has not been, even she has forgotten the identity of his mother, and he has been feeling that he would like to join her mother, his mother in life. So the difficulties were she only went there to look for a job, but unfortunately all things has turned in vain, because that work has no benefit to her or to his child. And as a family, I have experienced a lot of difficulties, but with God, I've done whatever I have been able to do, like the auntie, because Margaret's mother is my sister, a deceased sister. So I'm the mother and the auntie to her. And after some time, right from the time the child reached class 6, there was a time we communicated with her. And at that moment, that's when I came to realize that she's having mental disorder, because I just requested her to forward the money to bring up the child and pay the school fees, because she had not been sending the money. And from her mouth, I managed to understand the lady was not in a stable mind. So the question was, I just requested her to send money to pay for school fees for the child. But my daughter told me, no, I can't send the money to the teacher for school fees. I just I wanted to hear the reason as to why she told me that. And she told me, no, the father is paying the school fees. And I requested her to tell me, whose father is that who is paying the school fees? So she told me the father is Jimmy Kebaki. And I asked him, now Margaret, you are saying the father is Jimmy Kebaki. Do you really know him? No, don't pay school fees for that kid. Don't give that teacher the money, because the school fees has already been paid by the father. So from that conversation, I came to realize that my daughter is not in a stable mind. So I had to take measures and steps, and started following up her coming back to Kenya. So I decided to visit Foreign Affairs offices, and once I went there, we talked with them. They requested me to write down the letter, and I did exactly that, and I was given some days to go and wait for the feedback. Once I waited, there was no feedback. I called them, they were telling me no feedback, and once I got back into the offices, I went there and met. They had already been scanned the report from Foreign Affairs Office in Saudi Arabia, from the embassy in Saudi Arabia. So it was stating that the phone was, the nini was reported to the nearest police station. So I have to wait for the results. So I went back home. I kept calling them, and as I followed up, finally I did not come up with any help, because they told me the lady is over 18 years and she has a right to decide whether to stay and where not to stay. So as a mother, I only cried in the office and I got back home and relaxed and I told my God, help me because you are the one who blessed us with that lady and her life lies on your hands. So be with her in that status, know what she will be eating and how you will be surviving because you are the only God. And one day I believe that you will make her to come back to my hands. So I went back home. I have been struggling. I kept praying and praying. So I also decided to still make a further step. I went and visited the senator, the Kiambu senator, and we talked with him. I was given an appointment in KICC. I met him with the son of Margaret at that time. We went to National Employment Authority, we reported. Then there I was told to write down a request so that they may be able to follow up. And I was given 7 days waiting. After 1.5 weeks, we came back. And before I came back into that office, the lady that I was introduced by the name Mary, she came with videos in the phone, and she asked me, might she be the one you are looking for? Then after viewing the photos, I came to realize, to recognize that she was the one. So once I was getting back to NEA, I also reported that issue, and I was told to go back home. And then I requested the soldier to make me talk with the officer so that I may explain my case, because my lady has not disappeared from the home she went, and she's not a runner. So I talked with that officer, and after talking with that officer, she said that case was a crime, and so she referred me to DCI offices. Then after visiting the DCI offices at Kasarani, then I was told I should be referred to the headquarters offices. So I went to Mudaiga and reported, and they referred me to immigration offices.
Recording in progress.
Yes, continue.
I was referred to immigration offices, and once I visited there, they told me that that should have a court order, and I should find an advocate. So I just told them that I can't be able to stand for an advocate because I am not financially I'm not stable. So the lady talked with me, and she googled the computer and found me. She referred me to this NGO by the name FIDA. She asked me whether I do hear about them. I told her yes. So she referred me to those offices, and once I came into the offices, that's where I found them. I reported my case, I addressed them well, and they received me very well, and they have been okay and complete, and God bless you.
Thank you very much, Virginia, for that explanation of what you have gone through as a family member of a migrant worker who is based in Saudi Arabia, and all the efforts you have made to try and get redress for your family member to be able to come back to Kenya alive. I think you have heard from the horse's mouth that her dependent or her family member left the country because of the harsh economic conditions in the country, and therefore this just attests to the fact that the economic conditions are key drivers for why Kenyans leave this country, and specifically the semi-skilled and unskilled, to pursue greener pastures in the Gulf Cooperation Council. Therefore, based on this, we shall move to the next question, which narrows down to the diaspora policy of Kenya, and shall be a little. We'll get back to the trajectory of the plight of migrant workers, but it is good to evaluate the policies at the national level which govern govern the issues of migrant workers or Kenyans in the diaspora, if you may want to call it that. Now, the diaspora policy came into force in 2015 with the objective of mainstreaming the Kenyan diaspora into the national development processes. I would like to ask, I think I would like to pose this question to Peter to just shed some light on whether the Kenyan government has been able to mainstream the Kenyan diaspora from your experience as a Kenyan living in the diaspora, and whether
to keep at least 8 hours of rest per day and at least 1 day off every week. The workers are also entitled to suitable living quarters and paid medical in cases of war and other emergencies. Now, with this in mind, I would like to discuss what the Kenyan government can do with the Kenyan foreign policy in order to safeguard the human rights of women migrant workers. So this year, Saudi Arabia jumped to number 2 in diaspora remittances, outranked by the US only. Because of this, my first point is that the government should renegotiate the domestic workers' remuneration based on Kenya's current GDP, which has been rising steadily at an average rate of 0.33% per annum over the last 10 years. So this is a sign of economic strength. Number 2, the government should insist on standard contracts for all workers and not the oral agreements that have been processed in the past. This contract should ensure that the workers are well compensated for their work and that they have better working conditions and benefits. Number 3, the government should set up an office in Saudi Arabia to vet all agencies that recruit domestic workers from Kenya. Through this office, they will be able to physically inspect living quarters as well as ensuring there is no breach of contract. So such an office can actually bridge the gap between the lady that has just spoken right now and the employer over here. Okay. Number 4, the government should stop the exploitation of domestic workers and insist upon a higher class of laborers. For example, they should look at bringing cleaners instead of house girls who are under contract with institutions such as hospitals and universities. Number 5, the government should implement a better vetting system with agencies that handle the migration of domestic workers. They should also put in place steep penalties for breaking the rules. Number 6, domestic workers should undergo training prior to their departure. But first, the government should train the trainers, and these trainers must have had previous working experience from the Gulf. So a lot of the issues that we face here are really not about the employers here, but about the government policies. It has everything to do with the government, the agencies that handle the migration, and to some extent the workers themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Hanai, for that elaborate explanation on quite a number of recommendations that the government should take in place to ensure that the rights of migrant workers, and specifically women migrant workers, are realized in the Gulf Cooperation. But to just take you back, because we were addressing the question of the policy, since we were not able to see whether mainstreaming of the Kenyan diaspora in national development processes has been realized, I think from your comment on the increase in GDP and the contribution through remittances of migrants in organizing various conferences around how to marshal the Kenyan diaspora towards economic development through remittances. I think the theme across the board I have seen for various conferences that have been held relate to remittances. But the question that I would pose is whether in these conferences there is a question that touches on the social aspect of migrant workers, which is going to come much later. Perhaps to just take a look also at the policy, the diaspora policy, it empowers, it seeks to empower Kenyans abroad to effectively contribute to the development of the country by enhancing the capacity of to offer consular services. In your recommendations, I think I haven't had aspects of consular services abroad. Perhaps maybe you can shed some more light on how effective consular services are in the diaspora.
If I might, jump in there. Right? I think one of the things that Halai said a bit earlier was that she wasn't at liberty to disclose what arrangement she's made with the embassy, and obviously it's the embassy that offers us consular services. But I can say a few things since I'm no longer in Saudi, and therefore I can give you a bit of a view from my end of how that works. In my opinion, consular services offered by Kenyan embassies are very highly visualized. And what I mean by that is that a lot depends on who the ambassador is at the time, and therefore who the staff are. And I'll give you an example from Saudi Arabia. For a long time, the ambassadors that Kenya sent to Saudi Arabia to represent Kenya's interests tended to be Muslims, either from the coast of Kenya or from northeastern province. Now, what would happen is that the Kenyans who went to the Gulf to work in Saudi Arabia typically were not really Muslims. Most of them were Christians, and they were usually from upcountry. Whenever there was a dispute between a Saudi Arab Muslim employer and an African Christian Kenyan employee, the ambassador and his staff, who tended to be from the coast or from northeastern province, would generally believe the Muslim over the Christian. This is a theme that came up over and over again when I was in Saudi Arabia and when I was living in the Kenyan society in Saudi Arabia. It was that there wasn't effective advocacy from the Kenyan embassy for Kenyans, and even when you found one or two attaches that were willing to sort of stand up for the Kenyan, the ambassador or a deputy ambassador or somebody else would overrule them, because the relationship between Kenya and Saudi Arabia was to them far more important than the welfare of one housemate or one driver or one this or one that. And so even though the embassies have the capacity to offer better consular services, the will to offer those services is not institutionalized. You cannot just walk into any Kenyan embassy anywhere in the world, let alone Saudi Arabia, and expect to receive the same level of service that you can receive actually desired from the British High Commission. So, a really good example. In 2013, there was a number of protests beginning 2011 in the Middle East, the Arab Spring. And so there was a lot of trouble in Saudi Arabia, particularly in the western city of Jeddah. And what Saudi Arabia did was that they realized this was an opportunity for them to get rid of some of the people they did not want in the country. And so they began deporting large numbers of Africans and other people that they saw as undesirables. Now, when Kenyans went to the Kenyan embassy for help, they wouldn't be helped, they would be turned away at the gate. Actually, the Kenyan security staff at the diplomatic quarter in Riyadh were instructed to turn Kenyans away. What Kenyans did was that they went to the British embassy in Riyadh, and the British embassy forced the Kenyan embassy to actually help these people. And so you get an idea of the dynamics that play out in the diplomatic world. The capacity to offer the services is there, the will, and just the sheer willingness and the sort of duty of care that our ambassadors and our diplomats should have does not exist. And so it's one thing to provide personnel, it's one thing to provide room and resources and everything else, but it's another to have people who are actually willing to out of the way to help. And that is the reason why we formed the Kenyan Society in Saudi Arabia as a group of Kenyans, because we were getting no help whatsoever from the embassy at the time.
Oh, thank thank you very much, Mr. Peter Wanyonyi, for that very insightful discussion around how the consular services have been operating abroad. Perhaps before we move to the next question, I would like also to hear the perspective from Lebanon, which can be addressed by Claire. How responsive do you think the consular services in Lebanon have been for the migrant workers who have reported violations to the Victims Advocates International offices?
Yeah, I can definitely answer that, and I'm going to answer it much the same way as Peter. The political will is not there, and I think, well, just to give you a bit of a background of what the situation in Lebanon, it occurred throughout 2020, and all the things I was talking about before, the economic crash, COVID, a lot of Kenyan migrant domestic workers were finding themselves on the street with no ability to return home. And they, what I hadn't realized, a group approached me, and they were receiving, first of all, they were receiving no help from the consul. But second of all, what I hadn't really realized is because women here are not able to have their own bank accounts, often what they will do is they will store their money with the consul and just they'll send some of it home, and the savings that they're making, they'll have it at the consul's office. And so they were going to the consul and asking to access some of that.
Sorry, Claire, I think we have lost you a bit.
I think she broke up a bit.
Yes,
but,
yes.
Just the point she was making, this is a very familiar tale in the Middle East. So now what that means is that it places the financial security of the woman in this employer.
Okay.
And so when a girl goes to the Middle East, it's potluck. Okay? If she is lucky and she finds a good employer, then she will do okay. But if she finds someone who's abusive or exploitative, he can even refuse to pay her salary. Or he could be saying, I have sent you money abroad to your parents and to whomever. But he hasn't got the power to compel him to prove that or to show. Now, Kalai mentioned the case of the Philippines and Nepal and Indonesia. And one of the things that the Philippine embassy does in Saudi, which is very admirable, is that they actually appoint roving ambassadors to literally go around and check on these girls, not wait for them to come to the embassy. They have somebody whose job, in agreement with the Saudi government, this person's job is to literally drive around and check on all the girls who work in that particular area, and each of them has a cell, not like 10 houses or 20 houses or whatever. And they speak to the girl and they make sure that she is okay. Kenya does not have any such arrangement. So when our people go there, when they're exploited, they literally have no one to turn to unless they find someone who is, benevolent enough to give them help. Sorry, Claire, I think you broke off, and that's why
I did, sorry.
Welcome back.
Thank you for filling in.
Yes.
I'm not sure where I broke off, but so yeah, the situation for Kenyans trying to get help at the embassy was that they were, at the consul, was that they were going to the consul, they were asking for their money, which they had stored at the consul, so that they could use it to try and get themselves out of the situation. They were asking for help in being able to return back to Kenya, and they were getting, not only were they getting refused all of that by the consul here, but there were numerous allegations of people being sexually harassed and physically assaulted when they were making those requests. The consul here is a Lebanese national, and the allegations were made against him and his assistant. They're both Lebanese. It's not a full embassy that's here. The embassy is in Kuwait. And so I think one of the problems is, with the lack of will, there's not a lot of sympathy, there's not a lot of connection between the consul staff and the Kenyans that are trying to access services, because these, the people that work there, they do work for the Kenyan government, but I don't think, having met them, that they feel like they work for the Kenyan government, and they certainly don't feel like they're there to be helping the Kenyans that come to them for assistance. The women who were at this point camping outside the consul, kind of begging for them for help, that did approach the embassy in Kuwait, where people who are actually Kenyan work, so that it's not their nationals that they're helping, but there's also kind of a disengagement from the embassy that oversees it as well, and the lack of accountability, so that when these issues did come out, they were reported in CNN, and we also wrote to the Kenyan embassy and others trying to address it. There just wasn't enough mechanisms to be able to make complaints and to ensure that they were followed up on. So there's a real problem in terms of Kenyans actually being able to access services here.
Thank you very much.
Can I just say something about what happened here during the pandemic? We have a new ambassador. This is his third year. Okay. Immediately the pandemic started, he was able to distribute food amongst the Kenyan workers who are not at work, and he did that for several months. He was able to take care of them, and in that way ensured that they were safe. They had food to eat. They had roofs over there. They had a place to sleep. So that is very different from what Claire is talking about, and also a little bit different from what Peter experienced previously. Okay, so I just wanted to throw that in. We've seen a lot of changes. We are actually seeing a lot of help from the current embassy. Thank you.
Oh, okay, thank you very much, Kalai, and thank you very much, Claire. I just wanted to ask Claire a follow-up question in regards to a rescue of women in distress. Are there any mechanism that exist in terms of rescuing women in distress?
Rescuing women that are in distress. The women really had to take this matter into their own hands and try and find creative ways to bringing to having these grievances be addressed, because the Lebanese courts are not really available to them, particularly after once they no longer have a valid contract. If they are on a valid contract, technically they can access the Lebanese courts, but there's a huge amount of research done that indicates that the system is so biased against them that they basically never win. Once they don't have a contract anymore, which is the case for once they're camping outside in front of the consul, they no longer have a contract. Those women cannot access the courts. So the Lebanese system isn't there. In terms of what's available in the Kenyan system, the only people that you can complain to is the same people that they're constantly dealing with. It's the consul and his assistant. So if their grievance is with them, then there isn't an obvious way for them to kind of tell it. As I said, they did write to the embassy. They really took that matter into their own hands. They wrote the letter. They found a way to get it to Kuwait, which wasn't really, nothing happened in response to that. And eventually they petitioned General Security, which is like the Lebanese security body that's in charge of immigration here, and they finally helped them with some travel documentation that would at least just get them out of the country, so that they could go back home. So there wasn't an official mechanism that they could use or go through, but they kind of just knocked on everybody's door until finally they found a way to get some help in leaving the country. And they also did talk to the media, because there was this case in CNN that was quite high profile. So they really kind of just tried everything until eventually somebody paid attention. But it wasn't a formal mechanism as such, and that's problematic.
Okay, thank you very much, Claire, for that elaborate explanation on whether there are formal mechanisms for just getting ladies who are in distress to help. Back to Halai, because she mentioned something, a different approach in Saudi Arabia. Perhaps she has mentioned there's a new ambassador who has made efforts to assist Kenyans in distress in Saudi Arabia, and I commend the ambassador for the efforts that he has made towards just trying to help those who are in distress. But perhaps to just expound on these efforts, because where we speak about just donation of or giving out food, that may not really, it may assist temporarily, but in the long term, where there are concerns about contracts not being, the migrant workers not being, women migrant workers not being issued with contracts, not being paid their dues, not being allowed to go to seek for medical assistance when they fall ill. These are critical issues that touch on the livelihoods of people. So beyond the food, and we commend him for that effort, what has help or tangible help have the women migrant workers received in Saudi Arabia?
Thank you for your question. Unfortunately, as I mentioned before, I have not been released to give that information. I'm not at liberty to discuss that right now.
Okay, all right. Okay, thank you for that. But from your experience, have you seen any tangible efforts that have come towards supporting the women migrant workers to just get a lasting solution to the problems that they face?
Through the chat box, you can ask any questions which we'll share with our panelists for response. And then there's another question I'd like to put to Peter. Peter, recently the court boss Francis Atwoli mentioned that going to the Gulf is like slavery. And if you look at the comments made by Halai about the caliber of workers who should go to the Gulf, and then in a response, the Labour CS Cabinet Secretary Simon Cheligui also said that the government is working to have bilateral agreements with these Gulf countries. Does it mean that these agreements have never been in existence, or what's happening?
The first time we had about the life agreements between Kenya and Gulf countries was when the then Vice President Kalonzo Musyoka visited Saudi Arabia. I think, from memory, it was probably about 2006 or so. And at the time, the plan was that there would be an agreement of the sort that the Philippines and Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and so on have, which, as Halai said earlier, they delineate the rights of a worker, a foreign worker, and they also delineate the responsibilities of the employer. And they give the embassy certain rights as far as that worker is concerned. Chief among them is the ability to see this worker at least once a month, or speak to them on the phone verifiably at least once a month. There's never been such a bilateral agreement. And the reason for that is obvious. The relationship, we have had previous instances where we tried to have those bilateral agreements, and there have been ministerial delegations from Kenya that went to the Gulf countries, but nothing came